Since ancient times, there has been a warning passed down through the mountains and villages of Joseon. Never set out on a journey on a night when the red moon rises. The red moon was a warning from heaven itself. On those nights when blood and desire and death wound themselves together, like tangled roots, when the dark energy of the mountains swelled to its peak, if a foolish human lost their way, they would never return. The story I am about to tell you is about a young scholar and what happened to him on one such night, beneath a crimson moon that bled across the sky like an open wound. He survived. He made it home. But from that night forward, he was never quite the same man again. This is a story about greed and about compassion. It is a story about a creature who carried 1,000 years of sorrow inside her chest. And it is a story about what a single act of kindness, given freely and without expectation, can truly change. The time was the reign of King Sukjong in the kingdom of Joseon. Making his way down a mountain road toward his hometown was a young scholar by the name of Lee Jin-woo. He was 26 years old. He had failed the Royal Civil Service examination 3 times now, and he was returning home with nothing but a worn travel bundle on his back, a few half-eaten rice balls wrapped in cloth, and a handful of old books that had done him absolutely no good so far. The villagers who knew him back home had always said the same thing about Jin-woo. That boy is too kind for his own good. His soft heart will be the death of him. But Jin-woo had never taken that advice seriously. He could not understand how kindness could ever be a flaw. He smiled when others scowled. He helped when others walked past. He trusted when others raised their guard. To him, the world was a place where decency still mattered, where a man's character counted for something beyond his exam scores and social standing. He was, in every sense of the word, good, and perhaps that was why the mountain chose him that night. The afternoon light was fading by the time Jin-woo sat down on a large flat stone to rest. He reached into his bundle and pulled out one of his last remaining rice balls, pressing it to his lips when a small sound made him pause. A thin, ragged dog had appeared at the side of the road. It was pitiful to look at. Every rib was visible beneath its dull coat, its tail barely moving, its dark eyes fixed on the rice ball with a kind of quiet desperation that Jin-woo found impossible to ignore. He hesitated. He was 3 days without a proper meal himself. That one rice ball was more precious than it looked. But then he split it in half and held one piece out toward the dog. "Go on," he said softly. "A beast knows what gratitude means. How could a man not know the same?" The dog took the rice ball from his hand, and then it did something strange. It simply sat there and looked at him. Not the way a hungry animal looks at its feeder. It looked at him the way a thinking creature looks at another thinking creature. Deep, clear, and entirely too knowing for a stray dog on a mountain road. Jin-woo shook off the feeling, shouldered his bundle, and walked on. He did not look back. As the last daylight bled out of the sky, something else crept in to take its place. A red moon, enormous and swollen, rose over the mountain ridge. Not the warm orange of harvest nights, not the pale amber of autumn. This was red the way old blood is red the way wounds are red. Jin-woo noticed it and felt something cold settle in his chest. He told himself it was just the unusual humidity, just the atmospheric conditions playing tricks on the moonlight. He told himself there was nothing to worry about. That was his first mistake. The fog came down from the mountain like something alive. Within a quarter of an hour of entering the deep forest path, Jin-woo had completely lost his way. The trail he had walked a dozen times before simply disappeared. There was no fork in the road, no obvious wrong turn. The path was just there one moment and gone the next, swallowed by fog and shadow and the strange humming silence of old trees. The red moon was barely visible now through the canopy above, a smear of dark crimson pressing through the mist. There were no stars, there was no wind. The only sounds were the soft crunch of dead leaves beneath his feet and his own breathing, growing faster than he would have liked. He turned in a slow circle, trying to find a familiar landmark. Nothing. Strange, he muttered to himself. I've come this way before. Where am I? And then from somewhere deep in the fog ahead of him, he heard it, a low, broken sound, half moan, half breath, the sound of someone in pain. Jin-woo's feet moved before his mind could catch up. He ran toward the sound, pushing through branches and undergrowth until he burst into a small clearing. And there, collapsed against the roots of an old pine tree, was a young woman. She was perhaps 19 or 20 years old. She wore a white joggery and a crimson skirt, and the irony of that color, that particular shade of red, would only occur to him much later. Her dark hair had come loose from its pins and fanned across the ground. There was a wound on her brow, and a thin thread of blood had tracked down the side of her face and dried against her jaw. She was, despite the blood and the dirt and the fog, extraordinarily beautiful. Jin-woo stopped walking. His mind ran through the warnings he had heard over the years. Mountain spirits, fox demons, beautiful women who appeared alone on mountain roads after dark. His tutor had told him stories. His grandmother had told him stories. Every farmer and monk and traveler in Joseon had stories about what happened to men who let themselves be lured in by beauty in the mountains at night. He took one step back, and then the woman opened her eyes. "Please," she whispered, "help me." 2 words. That was all it took. Every wall Jin-woo had tried to build in the last 30 seconds crumbled flat. He was at her side before he had consciously decided to move. That was his second mistake. She said her name was Myunghwa. She was the daughter of a wealthy merchant in Hanyang, she told him. Her family had been destroyed by a corrupt official, a man of power and cruelty, who had wanted her father's wealth and taken it by force, wiping out her entire household in a single night. She had barely escaped with her life, and she had been hiding in the mountains, moving from place to place, for longer than she could clearly remember. She had been attacked on the path that evening, she said. She had fallen and hit her head. Jin-woo listened to all of this as he helped her walk. He believed every word. He was that kind of man. The house appeared out of the fog without any warning at all. One moment there was nothing but darkness and trees, and the next, there it was. A large grand estate, the kind of house that belonged to old nobility, with tiled roofs curving up at the edges and red lanterns hung along the eaves and a gate of dark lacquered wood, standing open as if someone had left it that way, specifically for them. Jin-woo stopped at the threshold. Something was wrong with the light. The lanterns cast a crimson glow instead of the warm orange light a lantern should cast. The courtyard beyond the gate was perfectly silent, not the peaceful silence of a sleeping household, but the absolute silence of a place that had never contained any warmth or laughter at all. The ornamental trees in the garden were shaped strangely, their branches twisting in directions that seemed to have nothing to do with how trees naturally grew. "This is your house?" Jin-woo asked. "Yes," Myunghwa said. "Please, come in and rest. You've been so kind to me." Her voice was warm and gentle. Her hand on his arm was soft and steady. The smell drifting from beyond the gate was sweet, almost unbearably sweet, like flowers blooming in a place where nothing should have been blooming. Jin-woo stepped inside. That was his third mistake. The room he was led to was dazzling. There is no other word for it. It was filled with the kind of furnishings that only the very wealthy could afford, lacquered cabinets inlaid with mother-of-pearl silk drapes that rippled slowly. Even in the still air, ceramic lanterns glowing with that unsettling red light, and at the center of the room was a low table covered with food. Not simple road food, not the modest offerings of an emergency household. A full feast, seollyeongtang steaming in a deep bowl, grilled abalone glazed with sesame and soy, a dozen different side dishes, rice wine in a painted ceramic jar. Jin-woo had not eaten properly in 3 days. He sat down. He tried to be polite about it, but Myung-hwa smiled and urged him on, and he was hungry, and the food tasted impossibly good. They talked. Myung-hwa was, as it turned out, a very good listener. She asked Jin-woo about his studies, about his failures, about his dreams. She listened with her full attention in a way that almost no one in his life had ever bothered to do. When he told her about the examination, about the years of preparation and the 3 consecutive failures, she looked at him with something that seemed, in the warmth of that room and the haze of the wine, like genuine understanding. "You work so hard," she said, "and the world doesn't see it. That must be very painful." Jin-woo felt for a moment that he might cry. He did not. At one point during the meal, he excused himself and stepped into the corridor outside the room. What he found there chilled him in a way he could not immediately explain. On the floor near the far end of the corridor lay a clump of reddish fur too long to be cat hair, too thick and too red to belong to any domestic animal. Pressed into the lacquered wood of a nearby doorframe were a set of deep parallel gouges, the kind of marks left by something with very long, very sharp nails. And from behind one of the closed doors along the corridor came a smell faint but unmistakable to anyone who had spent time in the countryside. Iron, old blood. Jin-woo stood in the corridor and told himself there was a perfectly reasonable explanation for all of it. He told himself that just as Myung-hwa appeared behind him, "Oh, that's just the storage room," she said brightly. "Old things, nothing interesting. Come back in." Her smile was beautiful and completely at ease. She put her hand on his arm and guided him back down the corridor. Jin-woo went. He did not argue. He did not trust his own instincts, and that was not technically a mistake. It was something worse. It was a choice. Somewhere beneath the wine and the warmth and the beauty of the woman beside him, some part of him had seen and understood, and he had chosen not to look. The night deepened. The wine continued. The conversation grew softer and slower and more intimate. And then Myung-hwa said something that stopped the world. She leaned slightly toward him, her golden eyes, and when had they become golden? Had they always been that color? Catching the red light of the lanterns. And she said, "Why don't you stay here? Forget the examination. Forget going home. There's food here and warmth, and I have no one. We could live here together, just the 2 of us. Forever, forever." The word landed in the room like a stone dropped into still water, and Jin-woo felt its ripples move through him. For one long, weak, honest moment, he wanted to say yes. He had failed 3 times. He had no future that was clearly visible. He was tired beyond the ability to express it. And she was extraordinary. Beautiful beyond reason, warm and attentive and present in a way that no one had been with him in years. He opened his mouth. And then his gaze drifted, almost accidentally, to the large bronze mirror hanging on the wall behind her. He looked at his own reflection first, and then he looked at hers. What he saw in that mirror was not a beautiful woman leaning toward him in the warm light. What he saw was a woman with 9 great foxtails fanning out behind her, white as bone in the moonlight, rippling and swaying like flames in a wind. They filled the mirror. They filled the entire reflection. 9 tails, thick and luminous and terrifying, and between them a pair of golden eyes that were not the eyes of anything human. The mirror had shown him the truth. Jin-woo could not move. He could not speak. He sat with his mouth open and his face emptied of color, staring at the reflection of the thing sitting across from him. And Myunghwa slowly, without urgency, as if she had done this many times before, turned to look at the mirror. Then she looked back at him. She smiled. "You saw the mirror," she said. Her voice had changed entirely. It was still beautiful, still low and smooth and controlled, but the warmth had drained out of it completely, like water draining from a broken vessel. What was left was something ancient and cold and perfectly composed. "It would have been better if you'd looked away," she said. "But then it doesn't really matter now." She stood up. The room changed around her as she rose. The warm red glow turned colder, bluer. The temperature dropped. The silk drapes went still. The food on the table lost its smell. And Myunghwa herself seemed to grow slightly taller, slightly sharper at the edges, as if the shape of a human woman had always been just an approximation she was wearing loosely over something else entirely. "I am what your people call a Gumiho," she said, in the tone of someone explaining a fact that should have been obvious from the beginning. "A 9-tailed fox. I have lived in these mountains for 999 years. Do you understand what that means?" Jin-woo did not answer. "It means I need one more thing to complete 1,000 years. One final thing, after which I become human." She tilted her head. "The liver of a man." Jin-woo ran. He did not think about it, did not plan it, did not bother with dignity or strategy. He simply turned and ran out the door and down the corridor and toward where he thought the entrance must be. The house would not let him leave. Every door he opened led to another room he had never seen before. Every corridor bent back in directions that made no architectural sense. He ran until his lungs burned and his legs ached and sweat ran into his eyes, and still the entrance never appeared. The house folded around him like a living thing, rearranging itself between him and escape, and from somewhere ahead or behind or above. He could no longer tell. Myunghwa's voice reached him, unhurried and almost amused. "Where are you going, scholar? No one leaves this house unless I allow it. 999 years in these mountains. Do you really think a few walls are beyond me?" He ran until he couldn't run anymore. He stumbled into a final room, a dead end, a small space with no doors, except the one he had come through, and a single window looking out onto a courtyard full of strange, twisted trees. He pressed himself against the far wall and waited. Myunghwa walked in without rushing. Her fingernails, as she stepped into the room, were longer than they had been before, the color of old ivory and sharp enough to catch the light as she raised one hand, slowly, and pointed it toward his chest. "You're a good person," she said quietly. "That's the ironic part. Of all the men I've brought here, you were the first one who stopped to help me on the road without being asked. The others walked past. You turned back." "Then don't do this," Jin-woo said. His voice was steadier than he expected. "Don't lecture me about what I should or shouldn't do," she said. You don't know what it is to live as I have lived. And she was right. He didn't. He closed his eyes. And something came to him there in that small room with her nails pointing at his heart. Not a plan, not an argument. Something more like clarity, the kind that only arrives when everything else has been stripped away and there's nothing left but the truth. He opened his eyes and looked at her. Myunghwa, he said. She paused. You said you want to become human, he said. You've wanted it for 1,000 years. You want to eat warm meals with people. You want to be held. You want to be loved and known and part of the world. Is that not what you want? Her expression did not change, but something behind it shifted. What are you trying to say? I'm saying, Jin-woo said slowly, that you want to become human by taking a human life. And I want to understand, do you really believe that a body soaked in murder will carry inside it the warmth you've been looking for all this time? Can blood that was taken by force hold love? Can a life built on someone else's death hold joy? The nails did not lower, but they also did not descend. You want the warmth of humanity, he said, but you're going about it in exactly the way that will make that warmth impossible. You want to be human, but this is not how humans become human. We are made by what we give, not by what we take. Silence. The kind of silence that has weight. Myunghwa stood with her arm raised and her golden eyes fixed on him, and she did not move. And in the stillness for just a moment, Jin-woo saw something flicker across her face that had nothing to do with predator or prey or 999 years of patience. He saw grief. It was then that the sound came from outside the window. A dog was barking, not the rapid, frantic barking of an animal in fear. One measured, resonant sound, repeated at intervals, as if calling something to attention, as if saying, look here, look now, while there is still time. The window burst open on its own, and the thin, ragged dog from the mountain road leaped through it and into the room. Myunghwa stumbled back. A sound escaped her, not quite a scream, something between shock and recognition, and her arm fell to her side. The dog's eyes were not the eyes of a stray animal. They burned silver and clear and utterly still, the way the eyes of very old and very wise things burn. The mountain god's messenger. The act of giving half a rice ball to a hungry dog on a lonely mountain road that single, thoughtless, unconditional kindness had been seen and remembered by something much older and larger than either of them, and it had been repaid. In the moment that Myunghwa was distracted, Jin-woo's eye fell on something he had not noticed before. In the far corner of the room, almost buried under dust and cobwebs and the debris of centuries, was a small wooden chest. Light leaked from around its edges. Jin-woo crossed the room in 3 strides and opened it. Inside, scattered across the bottom of the chest like broken fragments of an old dream, were the shards of a fox bead. A fox bead Uigusul was the most precious thing a Gumiho possessed. It was the container of all her power, all her longing, all her accumulated years, and Myunghwa's fox bead had been shattered, broken into a dozen uneven pieces, dull and cold and silent, the light barely visible between the cracks, but still glowing, still after all this time, refusing to die entirely. Is this yours? Jin-woo asked. Myunghwa had gone completely still. Her golden eyes were fixed on the fragments in the chest, and all the composure had fallen from her face at once, like a mask dropped. What was underneath it was something raw and old and devastated, something that had been living behind the hunger and the predation and the 1,000-year project of survival. Something that looked, and this would stay with Jin-woo for the rest of his life, unbearably lonely. "Don't touch that," she whispered. "How was it broken?" he asked. She didn't answer for a long moment, and then, slowly, with great difficulty, she spoke. She had not always been alone. Once, long ago, before any of the living could remember, Myunghwa had loved a human man. This was not unusual for Gumiho. The stories were full of such things. She had taken human form and lived alongside him, and they had had children together. And for a few decades, she had known something she had never expected to know. Happiness. Simple, ordinary human happiness. The kind that involves sharing meals at a small table and watching children grow and sleeping beside someone who knows your real name and loves you anyway. But the man's family had discovered what she was. Not her husband he had always known, had always accepted her, but the others, the uncles, the cousins, the elders who decided such things. They had broken her fox bead deliberately, knowing it would cut her off from the power she needed to protect herself and her children. And in the chaos that followed, she had lost everything: her husband, her children, the handful of decades of ordinary life that had been more precious to her than all the centuries before them combined. What remained afterward was the bead, broken, and the hunger, and the hatred, and 999 years of channeling all of that into a single goal: to reassemble herself, to complete the 1,000 years, to become human by any means necessary, because she believed that if she could only become human, she might find a way back to whatever had been taken from her. She had convinced herself that the liver was the only way. She had convinced herself that if she could cross that final threshold by force, the warmth would come back on its own. She had been wrong about almost everything. When she finished speaking, the room was very quiet. Jin-woo looked at the fragments in the chest for a long time. Then he looked at her. "I have read about fox beads," he said carefully. "Old texts, things most scholars have forgotten. They say that a fox bead shattered by hatred can only be remade by the opposite force." He picked up the fragments one by one and held them in his cupped palms. By genuine compassion, given freely with full knowledge of what it is being given to. Myunghwa watched him. "I know what you are," he said. "I know what you've done. I know what you came close to doing tonight." He extended his hands toward her, the fragments cradled in his palms, glowing faintly between his fingers. "And I'm giving this back to you anyway." No one could have predicted what happened next. The fragments in Jin-woo's hands began to glow, not faintly, not as they had before, that faint, reluctant flicker between the cracks. They blazed, warm and white and steady, like something that had been waiting a very long time for exactly this moment. The light spread upward from his palms and filled the room from the floor to the ceiling, flooding into every corner, washing away the cold blue light that had lived there for centuries. The fragments moved toward each other, slowly, piece by piece, as if remembering something they had forgotten. The shards drew together and sealed themselves into a whole. The cracks disappeared. The surface became smooth and luminous, a perfect sphere glowing like a small captured sun, resting in Jin-woo's hands. He held it out to her. Myunghwa hadn't moved. Her face was the face of someone watching something impossible, and also the face of someone for whom the impossible had arrived. Too late, and this was the one that broke through everything else. The face of someone who had been alone for so long. They had almost stopped believing that moments like this one could still exist. She took the bead from him with both hands. The moment it touched her, her 9 tails rose, all 9 of them, enormous and luminous, spread out behind her like the wings of something celestial. She gasped a sound so human it was almost difficult to reconcile with the creature before him. The golden light in her eyes softened, shifted, became something that was almost tears. One tail faded, then another until all 9 were gone, and Myunghwa stood in their absence as simply herself, no tails, no golden eyes, no ancient hunger. Just a woman who had been carrying a great weight for a very long time, setting it down at last. She was crying, not the practiced tears she had shown him earlier in the evening, the real kind, the kind that comes when something you had stopped hoping for finally happens. I can't explain it, she said. I thought the only way was to take. I've been taking for so long I forgot there was another way. You wanted to belong to the human world, Jin-woo said quietly. But you've always been part of it. You've been part of it since you loved someone. That doesn't go away. She looked at him for a long moment. Are you not afraid of me? She asked. I was, he said honestly. I'm still a little afraid. But I'm also very tired, and I think you're very sad. And I think both of those things are more true than the fear is. She almost smiled. Then she straightened, and something formal and final settled into her expression. She bowed to him a deep, slow bow, the kind given to someone who has done something that cannot be repaid. Thank you, she said, for your life and for your kindness. The first one was given to you tonight. The second one that was always yours. There is something you should know, she said. About your road? What about it? You've been worrying about the examination, about failure, about what people think of you when you return home without success. She looked at him steadily. Don't. That's all I wanted to say. Don't. Jin-woo didn't answer. He wasn't sure he knew how to stop. You gave half a rice ball to a hungry dog today, Myunghwa said. You helped a stranger who might have killed you. You spent the last chance you thought you had trying to fix something instead of running from it. She tilted her head. Those things don't fail. They just take longer than examinations to be recognized. And then she was gone. She did not walk away. She did not open a door. She simply diminished, as fog diminishes in morning light, as darkness diminishes when a lamp is lit. She became less and less present until she was not present at all, and the room that had held them both was just a room, and the house that had been a trap was just an old empty structure, and the night that had been full of terror was just a night. Jin-woo walked out of the house into early morning. The red moon was gone. In its place was the pale gray of just before dawn, the sky thin and clean and beginning, distantly, to show the very first suggestion of light. The fog was already dissolving. The trees were just trees. He stood at the gate for a moment and looked back. The house looked like an old ruin. Not the grand estate it had appeared to be the night before, just a structure that had been empty for longer than anyone alive could remember, the tiles broken, the gates sagging, the courtyard overrun with ordinary, unsupernatural weeds. He turned and walked down the mountain. At some point on the path, he realized he was holding something. He looked down at his hand and found, lying across his palm, a single small shard, the only piece of the fox bead that had not rejoined the whole. It was cool and smooth and faintly luminous, catching the pale early light. He stopped by the side of the path. He found a soft patch of earth between the roots of an old pine, very much like the tree where he had found Myunghwa the night before, and he knelt down and pressed the shard into the soil. Rest well, he said quietly. I hope they're waiting for you wherever you're going." He stood and kept walking. The sky brightened around him as he went. The birds started up. The morning came in completely, and the mountains were just mountains, and the road was just a road, and the man walking down it was just a man, tired, hungry, somewhat shaken, but whole. He no longer felt the desperate urgency about the examination that had driven him for years. What he felt instead was something quieter, a sense that there was work to be done in the world, real work, work that mattered to real people, and that the examination was a door to that work, not an end in itself, that he would study differently now, not for the score, not for the recognition, for the thing on the other side of passing. The farmers in the village below were just beginning their day when Jin-woo came down the mountain road and rejoined the world. Several months later, he passed the examination. He served as a local magistrate for the next 20 years, known throughout the region for a particular quality that was difficult to name precisely, but that everyone agreed was present: a kind of attention, a willingness to see people as they actually were, not as they appeared, a patience for complexity, for grief, for the long unresolved stories that people carry with them. The story he told when he told it was always the same. He had met a creature on a mountain road who had nearly killed him, and in the end, the thing that saved them both was the same thing that had always saved people, in all the old stories, in all the passed down wisdom, in all the warnings and the lessons and the tales told by firelight in the dark. Not power, not cleverness, kindness, given without condition, given to a hungry dog with no expectation of return, given to a 1,000-year-old monster with full knowledge of what she was, given in the way that only truly works without checking first whether the recipient deserves it. That is the end of the story of Lee Jin-woo and the nine-tailed fox of the Red Moon Night. That is the end, and also, as all the old stories remind us, the beginning. If this story sparked your imagination, please like and subscribe to discover more original tales inspired by the world of Joseon. Thank you for being part of our journey, and we will see you in the next one.